Good evening and welcome to our final installment of Women of Wonder Sharing Her Story. I'm Christal Crosby, the Assistant Director of Student, Young Alumni, and Affinity Programs for the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve. And now more than ever, you may be seeking community or closeness with whom you have something in common. I am hopeful that we can provide that for you today. We strive to bring valuable programming through our platforms to connect you to each other as well as to the university. We host programs that provide resources to more than 115,000 alumni globally. Our wish is that you stay connected to CWRU. Now, for a few housekeeping notes. The program is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website and social media channels. Everyone is muted by default. We do this so that there is no background noise and so that our featured speaker can better focus on the questions at hand. We would appreciate it if you could turn on your video so we can see everyone that's participating with us today. The Alumni Association is sponsoring this special series with our partners at the Flora Stone Mather Center for Women. Please welcome the Center Director, Dr. Angela Clark Taylor.
Thank you so much, Christal. You may be hearing potentially my son in the background getting ready for dinner, so I apologize in advance, just in case. Welcome. The Women of Wonder program started in 2018 and continues today as a collaboration between the Flora Stone Mather Center for Women and the Alumni Association. The program strives to achieve the goals of showcasing and celebrating achievements of esteemed alumna, like our speaker tonight, and connecting alumni around common interests, elevating professional development opportunities. To that end, we'll be launching a second poll now, and I hope you can share a bit about your goals for joining us today. While you fill out that poll, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this year. We started our first ever Women of Wonder Sharing Her Story series during Women's History Month. And we've been excited to feature leaders and champions who persevere to make history and create new living HERstory. This program culminating tonight highlights the Mather Center's strategic goals of leading, empowering, and innovating. And we'll hear more about how tonight's speaker resonates with these goals. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and to our speaker and moderator, who I'll now introduce. Dr. Heather Burton. Dr. Heather Burton is the Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity, specializing in gender and racial equity. She is also co-director of the African and African American Studies program here at Case Western Reserve University and a faculty in theater and social work. Dr. Burton has held leadership positions in the Ellipsis Institute for Women of Color in the Academy, the Greater Cleveland Delta Life Development Center, Shine Inc. She holds a degree from the Ohio State University, University of Akron, and Cleveland State University. Thank you, Heather, for moderating tonight, and please take it away.
Great, thank you, Dr. Clark Taylor. And with our inside, I call her Dr. ACT, which are her initials. But I thank you all. I thank the Alumni Association and the Center for Women for this wonderful event. And so tonight, I have the pleasure of moderating and interviewing our guest, Dr. Bettye Kearse. And so I think, when we think about just the significance of your work and really the significance of the oral tradition and what has taken place as around this story, I am so excited to interview you this evening and to hear from you around the documentary that we had the opportunity to view, as well as your book, The Other Madisons. And there's a segment right at the intro that starts, The Other Madisons, Bettye Kearse, a descendant of an enslaved cook, and according to oral tradition, President James Madison shares her family story and explores the issues of legacy, race, and the powerful consequences of telling the whole truth. That idea of the whole truth is so pertinent to just use those words, the whole truth. And I've kind of been focused on that word lately when we talk about truth. And in that, one of the questions that I want to ask you or begin with is, when did you first learn you were a descendant of President Madison?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Burton. I grew up hearing about the president and his slave from the time I was about 5 years old. and trying to stand still beside my mom's sewing machine while she was making fancy dresses for me. And I would get fidgety, and she would say, please, try to remember, or always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president. And she was trying to get me to behave. But that statement is really my family's credo that has guided us for my family for more than 200 years. And it's been a source of inspiration and pride for all those years, particularly for my mother. But when I was 5 years old, I just thought she was trying to get me to behave. And then she would tell me the family stories that illustrated, why she thought I should behave because of all that our ancestors had been through, and again, all that they had been able to accomplish.
And I know you share that story in the documentary about your mom making dresses and staying by the sewing machine, and her pulling out even memorabilia and having those conversations about the memories and sharing with you this credo. But what I ask is, in finding out that you were a descendant of President Madison, how did that affect your life? What impact did that have on you to know that you were a descendant of President Madison? Now, I don't want to jump ahead either, Dr. Kearse, because I do want to talk about, you being the credo and the fact that the descendant comes from both African slaves and as a president. But right now, just with the presidency, when you think about being the descendant of a president and hearing that, how did that affect you?
Well, it certainly set high standards for not just for behavior, but also for accomplishments as I grew up. And when I was a teenager, I think I was kind of secretly proud of it, because I didn't want to have people think I was being stuck up, which was the term then. And I didn't want to be different either. But when I was young, my early teens, I was proud. But as I got older, and you say you want to kind of defer talking about the credo, so I won't say too much about that. But as I grew older, especially in my 20s, and really came to a head in 1990 when I became the griot, I began to wonder, should I really be proud of this man who had owned hundreds of people and who had raped one of my ancestors?
Yeah, and so in that, what were your feelings? What was the outcome in that dilemma of whether you should be proud or not?
Well, by 1990, which is when I became the griot, I did have a really strong concern about what Madison had done on the bad side, with this being a slave owner, and was still, kind of proud because he contributed so much to the country. But I really felt that I need to sort of face head on that he had raped at least one of my ancestors. It may not have been an assault, it could have been coercion. I don't know. But as I did more of my writing and my research, I became angry with him, actually, for what he had done.
So I want to back up just a little bit, because just in case there are people on the call who's not familiar with griot, can you just explain that term so that others on the call, just in case they haven't read the book or seen the documentary, understand what that means?
I will explain it and spell it. So a griot is a female griot. So griot, the female form is spelled Griotte, and the griot, a male, is spelled Griot. And griots and griots are oral historians in the ancient West African tradition. So for thousands of years, possibly before the birth of Christ, generations of West African griots have spoken the stories of their ancestors and the history of their people. So it's an entirely oral tradition. And this tradition remains alive in Africa. And even following some 200 years of voyages to America through the Middle Passage, it remains alive in many African-American homes today. The tradition of oral history is particularly important to African-Americans because it began as an oral history, but because slaves were not allowed to read, it had to remain an oral history. And only recently have many of us began collecting documents and writing down stories and collecting items and becoming archivists as well. So basically, it's an oral history tradition. And now it's being more supported by other types of research.
Why is oral history so important? Why is that tradition so important?
Well, it's especially important. I believe it's important to everybody because it's the family stories told from generation to generation that really tell you who your people were, what kind of people they were, what their values and beliefs were. You don't find that in documents, and you certainly don't find that in DNA. But for African Americans, it's even more important because, as I mentioned, we were not allowed to read or write, during times of slavery. Our names often were not recorded in documents at all. Sometimes it was just, a male slave, approximate age, and the gender. And families were separated. Names could have been changed when their new owners decided they didn't like the name they arrived with. Documents were burned. And people just weren't counted as people. So we've had to tell our stories and remember our stories rather than being able to rely on anything written.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note is that when we talk about African-American history and we talk about the history of enslaved Africans, is that we weren't people and we weren't considered human, and being less than human, you're not allowed to have the rights to read, and everything is stripped and taken away. And so when you think about that and you think about the oral tradition, what is it that the oral tradition does that written history does not do?
Well, as I mentioned, it tells you more about who the people really were, their values and their beliefs, also their personalities, their goals. Sometimes you hear their dreams. It really brings the ancestors alive. You can begin to see them and sense them as people.
Yeah, I think about, how often when you hear things that are verbal and audio, what it does for more of a feeling compared to when you're reading is that you can feel, like you said, you can sense the people. And then there's that connectedness from just hearing an oral tradition. I think about the stories that my grandparents used to tell. And I had a great uncle who just passed at 101 this last summer, 2020. And so just the stories that I used to hear and the rich history, the rich tradition of our family and the things that existed. And so in that, we've lost a lot of that. We've lost a lot of that oral tradition. And so what's your recommendation of getting it back? Because you've blessed your family with the book, and to have not only you to pass down the oral stories personally from yourself, but also in written document. What do you suggest families do to continue that oral tradition or to bring it back?
Well, I started off recommending that the young people ask the elders what they remember, and to write down whatever little bit those elders remembered about the people who came before them. Because even the smallest bit of information means a lot. It's a big clue as to who they were. But recently, I was in a conference with a historian who said that the elders should take on the responsibility of making sure that the young ones hear the story. So it certainly could go both ways. But I do think it's the young ones who should do the treasure hunting, going into the attics and basements and closets, looking for letters and photographs or birth certificates or any kind of newspaper clippings or whatever might have been saved. And of course, the elders can guide them. They can kind of lead the adventure. But I think it's the young people who should do the legwork. And then all the documents, items, it could be a button, it could be a piece of clothing, an army insignia, anything should be saved someplace special. In my case, it was a box, and I was blessed to receive this box. But one person in each generation should be responsible for that box and keep adding to it. So there's always one place to put it, and as other people send things to the person in charge, then it has one place to go, and it will accumulate and grow over time. And and today we can record the stories that are being told by the elders. And so the recordings should be kept in cell phones or however, the little recorders that can be saved in a box. But the important thing is to keep everything together, then have one person in each generation in charge, and that person must choose someone in the next generation to be in charge, so that the items in the box keep accumulating, the stories keep growing, and the tradition is upheld.
That's excellent. And then I wanted to ask that just because I'm sure there are people on this call, and especially with knowing your story and the oral tradition with the other Madisons, of how to keep that tradition going in a family if you really don't know and know where to start. And that box is an excellent idea. And so with getting to the other Madisons, why did it take you 30 years to write the other Madisons?
That is a long time, isn't it? And, while I was writing, I kept saying to myself, this doesn't make sense. Why are you still doing this? And because, it was a lot of work, it was very hard, and sometimes, I would get discouraged. I couldn't find the information I wanted. But you know what? I couldn't stop. It just felt like what I was meant to do. But when my mother first asked me to write the book, she intended for me to just write down the stories, put them all together in one book. But I knew that there was more than just my own family's stories to be told, that my family actually represented many, many other African-American families. So then I wrote this whole book that was a family history. And then I thought, well, if my family members were turned into fictionalized characters, then they could speak on behalf of other families. And so I wrote a second book. I wrote a whole book of a whole novel, but it wasn't that good. So I was in a writing class at Radcliffe, and they didn't like my fiction. They said that the characters were flat, they stayed on the page, and they didn't evoke any emotion. But they did like the prologue I had written to the book, which was about how my mother heard the stories and how I heard the stories. It was sort of like a little mini memoir. So they said, well, write the whole book like that. And I reluctantly did that. And so it's the third whole book that I wrote. So that's one reason it took 30 years, is that I had all this wonderful material, but I wasn't quite sure how best to present it. And another reason is that I had to grow as a person, because the stories were very complex. The experiences of my ancestors were very painful. And I had to deal with that pain and discover what was really, what did I want to convey about that pain and those stories. And yet another reason was the publishing industry is really hard to navigate. It is very difficult to find an agent. It's very difficult to find a publisher. And again, the research was hard. I mentioned that often names are not mentioned and are not recorded, I should say. And I was surprised at how many courthouses had burned down, especially in Tennessee for some reason. So documents were destroyed. I think sometimes on purpose. Mm-hmm. And it was just so hard to gather the information that I wanted to support the stories. Anyway, for all those reasons, it took 30 years.
But you got a great work after 30 years. So that's the outcome, and that's all that matters, is what 30 years produced. But in that 30 years or in that research time, what was the most significant thing, or what stood out to you as being significant in your research, the thing that was like the most significant for you?
Well, it was the enslaved people themselves. It was, their strength and their sense of hope and their talents. And the fact that the women went through so much, and that's important to bring out at any time, but especially this month where we're celebrating the accomplishments of women. The women endured rape. They endured having their children sold away, as well as the things that happened to men, you know, being starved or beaten and just treated cruelly in many ways. The women were just sort of the center of the home because the men were often emasculated. And the women kept the families together as best they could until, or unless some of them were sold away. And they endured.
And so with that and knowing this, you know, talking about the strength of women is Mandy. And so with Mandy, why was it important for you to trace Mandy's footsteps and give a voice to Mandy?
Well, I felt that knowing Mandy would help me to become the griot that I wanted to be. You know, one who had really understood this family credo, and which was always remember you're a Madison, you come from African slaves and a president, which really resounds with the abuses of slavery. But I felt if I could get close to Mandy, I could really understand this credo. And so I decided that I would try to trace her footsteps. So I went to Ghana, West Africa, and to Baltimore, where there was a slave ship replica. And I went many, many times to Montpelier. And over the years, I grew closer and closer to her and began to feel for certain, really, that I knew what she wanted me to know and what she wanted me to write. And I thought that she wanted me to write them in her words. So I did write, I can't remember how many chapters it is. I think it's about 7 in her voice, so that she could speak for herself through me.
For those who, again, who have not had the opportunity to read or even see the documentary, can you put in context who Mandy is for our audience that's listening?
Yes. Mandy was my family's first African ancestor in America and our first griot, our first oral historian. So Mandy was my 5 greats grandmother. And she was captured off the shore of Ghana and ended up at Montpelier, where she was raped by James Madison Sr., the future president's father. And she gave birth to Corinne, who had the relationship with the future president, James Madison Jr. So Mandy was our first ancestor and our first griot.
Yeah, and you know, and I was listening to the documentary and in the book thinking about Mandy and the idea of leaving, and we know that Ghana, Songhai, and Mali were rich African places, and when we think of countries within Africa, and when we think about Mandy having to being captured and leaving this richness to lose all freedom and to lose all of what she knew, and to come be forced to the Americas to convert. In that, how do you deal with the reality that some of your ancestors oppressed others? Well,
I mean, it's it's hard because they're all family. James Madison Jr. in particular, I feel some anger toward for owning slaves and, you know, sexually assaulting, or maybe he didn't assault, but having a sexual relationship with Corinne. And I mean, just that he owned 100 people. It was 100 people at a time. So over his lifetime, he owned a few hundred. But he was family. For the enslaved people, I recognize their strength and really encouraged by that and fortified by that. And, you know, it helps me deal with the anger that I feel towards Madison. I mean, it's really kind of a tough balance to hold.
Do you think, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, I don't want to cut you off, Dr.
No,
Cruz. Go ahead. No, you go ahead and finish your statement. I'll come back.
No, I was just going to say that it's really the enslaved people who inspire me and not so much the white side of my family.
Do you think writing this book helped in even releasing some of the anger to see the strength of your enslaved side of the family?
I mean, I guess it helps to write it down. I still feel the anger, but I think it does help to have some place to put it, you know, on a page. And it helped focus it. So yeah.
And I think, you know, dealing in that anger and dealing with, and that's the reality, is that I heard someone say the other day, I was listening, and I can't remember what I was listening to, but the comment that, you know, when we're talking about American ancestry, you either came from a slave owner or you came from an enslaved person. And so you have both of those things that you're navigating within this system of race. And so dealing in that. And I thank you for your transparency in terms of being honest about, you know, your feelings and how you're still feeling and navigating those spaces with the oppression of your ancestors. I want to touch now on this credo, and this credo is just so strong that I didn't want us to get into it too quickly because I want us to spend some time with this credo and the credo that you were raised on, as well as, you know, other family members. And to always remember, you're a Madison. You come from American slaves and a president. And so let's touch on that and talk about this evolution of the family credo and why this is so important. And then even spend some time talking about, you know, you say that, you know, your strength comes from the enslaved side of your family and that heritage. So let's just talk a little bit about that, about this credo and the importance of this credo.
Well, the credo began 6 generations before I was born, shortly after the end of the War of 1812. Dolly Madison, President Madison's wife, discovered that Corinne's son, who was also Dolly's husband's son, was in love with one of Dolly's nieces. And an interracial relationship was, you know, the worst thing that could happen in Dolly's view and those of other women of her social status. So she sold Jim The president, kind of weakly objected, but he let Dolly sell Jim. And as he was being taken away, Corinne pleaded with Jim, always remember you're a Madison. And she thought that the name could help them find each other someday. Well, they never saw each other again. But Jim was sold and ended up in Tennessee. But he remembered his mother's words, and he passed them on to his children, who passed them on to their children, and on down the line. And Jim's son, Emmanuel, my great-great-grandfather, when they were freed, he no longer needed the name as just a tool to find torn away loved ones. Now he could see that the name could be a source of inspiration, and Emmanuel had children. And so he taught his children to be proud that their name had come from a president, and to make the most of that legacy now that they had the chance. So Emmanuel changed the credo to always remember, you're a Madison. You come from a president. And so it remained that way for 2 generations, or about 40 years. And then my grandfather, Emmanuel's grandson, who was born free, was proud that his father and grandfather and other enslaved ancestors had overcome enslavement. And he wanted his children to understand that enslaved people were remarkable individuals who possessed inner strength and a sense of hope. And this is where I get this from my grandfather, that to respect all that they did and all the special qualities that they had that enabled them to endure enslavement, and the talents also that they had that enabled them to make many contributions to this country. So my grandfather added the words African slaves. So the credo became, always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president. And that's the way the credo has been for the last 100 years.
And so as you continue to teach this credo to generations following, how do you emphasize the African slaves over the president, and emphasizing the strength of that side of the family versus the idea of the president? Or is there an emphasis with either one when you're talking about passing the credo to generations that are following?
Well, for me, it is the slaves that we should be proud of. The president relied on slaves to become who he was, without the luxuries of having slaves do everything that had to be done on a day-to-day basis. He probably would have been able to go off to Princeton University and to study the great philosophers and to help formulate the contribution and eventually become president. And the enslaved people who took care of him also made tremendous contributions to this country. And so that's just what I choose to emphasize. My mother was never, not at all, ashamed of having enslaved ancestors, but she was particularly proud of having a president as an ancestor. And I just feel differently. I mean, we grew up in different eras, and I just feel as a product of the women's rights movements and the Black Power movement and the civil rights movement, that it is the descendants of slaves who should be honored now, and who are able to take advantage, or I shouldn't say take advantage of, but who have inherited the qualities that from their enslaved ancestors. And that's what I would like to emphasize to young people today, that they have these same qualities in them, and that they too can, have a sense of hope and inner strength and make contributions. So that's the way I feel about it. My daughter, who will be the next griot, I think that she will have the same view, but she might not.
I love it. And I love the fact of your view and the acceptance of the different views of your mother to the potential of your daughter maybe having a different view in terms of what the emphasis is within the credo. But I admire and respect and love that you focus on the aspect of the credo that is around African slaves, and just knowing the strength and teaching your family and those that are coming behind you the strength of Africans and what they possessed in order to get through slavery, and the contributions that they've made that are so often negated and underrepresented and talked about for what they have done for American society. And as you stated, Madison is probably as far as he was then because of what he had from African slaves. So I thank you for that, in recognizing that this is where you stand in terms of the credo. Now, there's a question that comes from the chat from Linda. Linda asked, how has the white side of the family accepted this book?
Well, I have met a number of people from the white side of the family, and some of them call me cousin, and have been very supportive and have tried to be helpful with the research. There have been others, though, who no one has ever been mean to me. No one has ever been rude. But there have been people who have information that they just won't give me. And so I don't think they're very happy with me and the book. And they've been obstructive.
Yeah, and
but I do want to give a shout out to my white cousins who have embraced me.
And I was going to ask, did you interview or have any conversations with any of them around writing the book? But you've answered. You kind of touched on it.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel also to know that they're hiding or they're keeping information and not sharing it as a descendant of Madison?
Well, I was disappointed and annoyed, but I also understood because they're trying to protect Madison's legacy.
It makes sense. And that's what happens in history, is that in order to protect the legacy, we keep the secrets and we don't share. There is, in your book on page 143, there's a quote that I want to ask you about. And I'll start reading just to kind of lead in, but it says, "Mom nodded. Some mixed race children and white children looked so much alike that when a bunch of them were running around a plantation, the only way to tell which ones were slaves was by their clothes. Raggedy, part white, brand spanking new, all white." She chuckled. I didn't. My friend Danielle had told me that the Canadians say if you shake any family tree, an Indian feather will fall out. I could coin a similar saying for Americans. If you shake any family tree, a chain will rattle. Tell us what you mean by that. If you shake any family tree, a chain will rattle.
Well, it's most family trees. I'm probably exaggerating a bit saying that it's any family tree, but it was very common for white masters to roam from cabin to cabin and to choose a woman that he wanted. And the term used in my family is visiting. Another term that's used in the South was trespassing. And that meant that someone other than the master was roaming from cabin to cabin looking for a woman. And I recently learned that, and I don't have the exact statistics, and the statistics do vary from from one part of the South to the other. But the bottom line is that an enslaved child was more likely to have a white father than a Black father.
That's a strong statement. And I think if you read that section, for those of you who have the book, that section is on page, let me go back to 143. And Dr. Kearse talks about trespassing and visiting in that section that you can review. But to think, and when you read that, you get that most of the children, the number of the children had white fathers. Our time is winding down. And so I want to give you the opportunity to, if there's anything that I haven't asked that you want to share, what I do ask is, what do you most hope readers will take away from this book?
You know, it's the strengths of a slave. And I was a pediatrician in inner city Boston for more than 30 years. And I really enjoyed it. But all too often, my Black patients would reveal in various ways that racism had affected them. It had affected how they saw themselves. That, you know, that they didn't have any talents, and they had come to believe that they didn't have any talents. And among the teenage boys in particular, that they didn't have anything in their futures except jail or an early grave through violence. And so there's this sort of sense of hopelessness. But I feel strongly that if our young people could embrace their slave ancestry and recognize that they have inherited the same qualities that the sense of hope, a sense of their own humanity, an acknowledgement of their talents, that they could, our young Black children could believe in themselves and grab onto and nurture their own inner strengths, their own talents, and ultimately make contributions. So I'm hoping that that message comes through in the book. Now, this particular book was written for adults, particularly, Black parents. But I want to write a young adult book with the same message so that they can kind of grab onto that and figure that out themselves.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know Ibram Kendi did that, writing different versions for his book to make it applicable to the listening audience. And I think that's a great idea to be able to share this. I kind of leave with this. Well, let me take this question, this last question that came in from the chat. I don't want to ignore it. But do you have family reunions that include both sides of the family?
I do not. I have just family reunions with my own African American family.
And so kind of to summarize, I think this is just a perfect quote to summarize a lot of your thoughts and where, you know, the focus on the African enslaved side of your family. But on page 241, you say DNA proof would be nice to have, but it wouldn't define what makes us proud to be who we are. Having James Madison on our family tree is pretty cool, but I tell my inquisitors, the pride we feel as a family, as a people, has little to do with the president. And so I think that sums up exactly what you have been saying in this interview. And so, Dr. Kearse, I will leave you with the last words. If there's anything else that you would like to share that we have not discussed.
No, I do want to just mention the film briefly. And that is, the filmmaker is Eduardo Montes Bradley. And I met him at Montpelier, I think 4 years ago, when we were working on a permanent exhibit at Montpelier. It's called A Mere Distinction of Color. And it's about the important role that enslaved people played at Montpelier. And Eduardo was doing the filming, the stills, the photographs for that. And I'm part of that exhibit, and he photographed me. And later on, he read my book and called me up and asked me if I wanted to make a movie. And I am so glad that I said yes, because the film sort of reminds us and that what William Faulkner once said, that the past is never dead. The past, in fact, is not even past. And so the film just shows how some of the issues that are brought out in the book are relevant today. He talks about he shows the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, it's all a result of what happened, during slavery. The past is never past. No, I'm sorry, the past is never dead. It's not even past.
That's powerful. The past is never dead. It's not even the past when we think about, yes, that is powerful. And I thank you so much for sharing with us this evening. And I thank you for the opportunity just to have this conversation and to have this dialogue and to learn more from you in this interview. So thank you. I thank the Alumni Association and the Center for Women for asking me to be a part of this wonderful dialogue. And so I will turn things back over to Christal, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We learned so much, the importance of oral history, and I sincerely appreciate Dr. Kearse sharing her story and the story of Mandy with all of us. And so if you had not had a chance to pick up the book or to watch the documentary, I definitely highly recommend it. And I just took up so many treasures from this conversation, everything from being the treasure hunter in your own family, I think was my key takeaway, and starting that box and really trying to embrace the hope, determination talents of our ancestors. So thank you, Dr. Kearse, for sharing that. Thank you, Dr. Heather Burton, for serving as moderator. And thank you, Dr. Angela Clark-Taylor in the Floristone Matters Center for Women for being a great partner with this event. I just want another quick reminder about another upcoming event. Join CWRU for the virtual Think Forum presented in partnership with the Floristone Mathers Center for Women on Tuesday, March 30th at 5 p.m. featuring T. Morgan Dixon, co-founder and CEO of Girl Trek. And if you visit case.edu/event, you should be able to find information about it and to register. But T. Morgan Dixon's talk will center on the intersection of race and gender, entrepreneurship, public health, and how Girl Trek has brought communities together before and during the pandemic. So again, thank you for joining us. Wish all of you a happy and safe evening. Goodbye.